Hello everybody, my name is Voxel Obsession, and welcome to part 2 of my weapon review video. In today's video, we're going to be reviewing the PYRO's weapons. Fun fact, the PYRO has the most weapons out of any class in Team Fortress 2, so this took a really long time to make. I've already explained how I'm going to be rating all of these weapons based off of utility, accessibility, and fun. So if you don't know about that, go watch my medic video on the same subject. So without further ado, let's get right into the first PYRO loadout. We're going to be starting off, as always, with stock. PYRO stock loadout includes the flamethrower, the shotgun, and the fire axe. Starting up with the first of those weapons, we've got the flamethrower. Now, the flamethrower is a very impressive weapon indeed. Extremely useful, very easy to use, and very fun. In terms of utility, the flame particles are great for huge splash damage, hitting a bunch of people, and that afterburn is so useful. So you can keep doing damage even when you aren't there. And even when you're dead, you can set it and forget it. Run away, do whatever you want, and they'll die probably most of the time, unless they get extinguished or they're being healed by a medic. Speaking of being healed by a medic, while someone is on fire, they get healed less by a medic. So you have more of a chance to kill someone who's being pocketed. In terms of accessibility, PYRO is one of the easiest classes to play. I'm not saying it's WM1 easy, because they also have an M2, Air Blast. So I gave that a 4 or 5 because air blasting is kind of hard to do. I would know because I kind of suck at it. And in terms of fun, it's fun. It's a fun weapon to use. It's not super duper awesome, like, I love this weapon so much, it's the best weapon ever. It's definitely fun though. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention that when you extinguish your teammates with an air blast, yes, you can do that. You gain 20 health for each teammate you extinguish. That is really great. I suppose Valve wanted to encourage pyros to extinguish people, but as a medic main, they don't. They don't do that. They still don't do that. They never extinguish me. Why? Why don't they do that? Moving on. The shotgun is a very underwhelming weapon, especially in the PYRO's hands, because it is most effective as a close-range weapon, and PYRO's flamethrower achieves that goal much better than the shotgun ever could. The only real effectiveness that the shotgun has is that you can set someone on fire and then shoot them with your shotgun, because once someone's already set on fire, they'll still be taking damage from the fire, and then you blast them with their shotgun, and that's huge damage. But I feel like the shotgun is much better replaced by something that gives PYRO a lot more range, like a flare gun or something. Which is why in terms of utility, I only gave it a 2 out of 5. There are not a lot of situations where PYRO would need to be using their shotgun, save for that situation where you're dueling a PYRO and you know that afterburn isn't going to really affect them. And, you know, it's a shotgun. It's not super easy to use, but it's not super hard to use, which is a 3 out of 5 on the accessibility scale. And in terms of fun, it's a shotgun. It's nothing special, really. And last, but honestly probably the least for the stock weapons, is the fire axe. This weapon suffers even more from the issue with the shotgun being overshadowed by the flamethrower's close range capabilities, because melee weapons obviously can only be used in close range situations, and since it only deals damage, well, why not use that time with a shotgun blast or just holding down your flamethrower? But in terms of utility, it's a melee weapon, so there are situations where melee weapons are preferable to using your flamethrower or shotgun. So yeah, 2 out of 3. In terms of accessibility, as I like to say with most melee weapons, it's a melee weapon. It doesn't go the extra mile to make it easier for new players, but it doesn't make it harder, Vita saw. And in terms of fun, it's a really boring weapon. It is incredibly boring, but 2 out of 5, definitely. It's not mind-bogglingly soul-crushing, but it's definitely not fun. Next up is the Gas Jockey item set plus the Gas Passer, which for some reason isn't part of the Gas Jockey item set. Starting off, we've got the Degreaser. I hardly know her. In my opinion, disclaimer, this is my opinion. Don't get mad at me, please. The Degreaser sucks. It's so bad. Why would you use it? Compared to stock, it holsters and deploys faster. Extinguishing teammates restores 20 health, which is the same as stock, with the downside of minus 66% afterburn damage penalty and plus 25% air blast cost. What the hell is the upside on this weapon? You do realize you can just hit the scroll wheel and get to whatever weapon you want to be using, right? Why is there a holster and deploy speed boost? I can foresee about 2 situations where this would come in handy. One, where you're using any weapon other than the flamethrower and you're suddenly like, hey, I wish I was holding the flamethrower right about now. Zoop, you pull it out, I don't know, 60% faster? Sure, I guess, why not? The second one is you're using a weapon that holsters slower or deploys slower, like the thermal thruster or the extinguisher. Okay, those upsides are kind of disappointing, to say the least. Let's look at the downside. You do 1/3 of the afterburn damage. Instead of doing 3 damage per tick, you do 1. That wouldn't even kill a scout on half health. Oh, and the higher air blast cost, instead of consuming only 20 ammo, it now consumes 25. That brings the amount of air blast that you can do down from 10 to 8. Not to mention that it eats more into your precious ammo supply. I'm honestly confused why anyone would use this. Like, if you use this weapon, leave a comment down below and tell me why I'm so wrong for thinking that it's bad. But like, I'm honestly confused. Anywho, in terms of utility, I already explained what situations would those upsides be useful in. And hey, the situations where afterburn and air blasts come into play happen way more often than, hey, I need to be holding my flamethrower right about now. In terms of accessibility, it's harder to use than stock because of the downsides. And in terms of fun, it's less fun to use because of the downsides. What's that horrible smell? Why, it's the Gas Passer, of course. The Gas Passer is a unique throwable weapon for the PYRO that creates a horrific visible gas cloud that coats enemies with a flammable material, which then ignites into afterburn if they take damage, even other pyros. Usually, pyros don't take any afterburn damage, but with the Gas Passer, they absolutely do. Along with that, it also allows the Neon Annihilator to land critical hits on people. The afterburn adds up to a total of 80 damage, with 4 damage per tick for 20 ticks. Now, the Gas Passer is very useful because it can affect multiple enemies, and it does a lot of damage. In terms of accessibility, this also gets a 4 out of 5 because it's not that hard to use at all. You don't need to have good aim, you don't need to really do anything at all. It's really easy. And in terms of fun, it's easy and very effective and very fun to use. All in all, not a bad weapon at all. Moving on to the melee weapon of this loadout, we've got the speedy car battery on a stick, the Power Jack. While held, it grants 15% faster move speed, and every time you kill someone with it, you get 25 health. As a downside, you take 20% extra damage from all sources, but only when the weapon is active. Because PYRO doesn't often use her melee weapons, this doesn't often come into play. You can use it to quickly get back to the front lines and then put it away and use your primary or secondary weapons instead. For that reason, I gave it a 4 out of 5 on the utility scale. It would be a 5 out of 5 if it was a more effective melee weapon, but sadly it is not. Now, in terms of accessibility, it's not harder to use than stock because of the extra speed boost, but you do have the damage vulnerability, so that balances out quite nicely for a 3 out of 5. And then for fun, nothing more fun than going faster than you probably should on any class, 4 out of 5. All in all, this battery makes it really easy to charge into battle. Moving on to the next loadout, we've got the oddly named Dr. Grordbort's Moonman pack. Now, I must say, out of all the loadouts I've had the pleasure of playing, this one has to be the most fun. But I digress. We will start off this loadout with the... Oh my god, look at that. That right there, that is what a perfect weapon looks like. And that weapon is called the Phlogistinator. Just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Anyways, the Phlogistinator has the very cool ability to give you full crits for quite a long time, actually. The way you get it is by dealing damage, and to activate the crits, you taunt. During that taunt, you are completely invincible, with the downside of no random crits, which I'm sure the crits provided by this weapon far outnumber any random crits that you would receive, and no air blast. Who needs air blast? It's too hard to use anyways. Because of how incredibly useful full crits for like 10 seconds is for the PYRO, I gave it a 5 out of 5 for utility. The fact that the air blast is missing, well, the air blast only comes in handy in a few select scenarios anyways, and critical hits come in handy a lot more often, in my opinion. In terms of accessibility, well, the only downside for the flamethrower was that the air blast was hard to use, so that's gone, and it's replaced by something much, much better, so super easy to use, practically brainless, I would say. And in terms of fun, it's so fun, just so many crits, super easy to use. It's a really fun weapon design too, and just the different particle effect and the whole taunt system with the full crits, it's great. Amazing weapon, 10 out of 10, 15 out of 15 actually, would recommend. Moving on to the secondary in this loadout, we've got the Melter of Men, the Man Melter. Now, the Man Melter is technically a flare gun, so in comparison to the flare gun, it has a 50% faster projectile speed, does not require ammo. On alt fire, you can extinguish your teammates, and extinguishing your teammates restores 20 health. When used in tandem with the Phlogistinator, this basically gives you an air blast, but only the functionality of helping your teammates and not really deflecting projectiles in any way. Speaking of the air blast, every time you extinguish a teammate that's on fire with it, you gain a critical hit with the weapon. These can be stored for later use, but you lose them all when you die, sadly. This very nicely makes up for the lack of random crits. Not only that, you can switch to another weapon and it will reload while you're not even holding it. This seems very useful, which is why I gave it a 4 out of 5. In terms of accessibility, it is a very weird projectile and can be pretty hard to hit people if you're not firing into a giant crowd, thus granting it a 3 out of 5. It's not super easy and it's not super hard. And in terms of fun, it's a somewhat boring looking weapon, but it's not as boring as a shotgun, so, 3 out of 5. Also, it's not super fun to use either, but again, it's not really boring. It doesn't really go out of its way to be special. Moving on to the direct upgrade from stock, not the first degree, nor the second degree, but the third degree. Now, the stats for the third degree go a little bit like something, only upsides, no downsides. So, this means that it's stock, but better. It doesn't even matter what the upside is. It doesn't matter how often that this comes into play. This is a direct upgrade to stock. Do you know what that means? Stock is useless now. The normal fire axe has no use because the third degree is just a direct upgrade to it. And because of that, I just gave it the same stats as the fire axe, but gave it 1 extra point to utility. Because if you're ever fighting someone who's being healed by a medic, or you sneak up on a medic, that's just more damage. I wonder what made them do this. Like, no downside. Like, no slower firing speed, no less damage, nothing. Just a big fat direct upgrade. Oh, and I also gave it an extra point to fun, because it's not boring. And now for the loadout that you've all been waiting for, the back burner to back scratcher to thingy on my back. That's what the loadout's called. It obviously consists of the back burner, the back scratcher, and the thingy on my back being the thermal thruster, a jetpack item for the pyro. And we're gonna start off with the first weapon, the back burner. We all know spies hate pyros and pyros hate spy, but if you ever wanted to play spy as a pyro? No? Well, too bad! The back burner will always deal critical hits when you're behind your enemy, most of the time, when the game decides to let you do that. Not only that, but extinguishing teammates also restores 20 health. The only downside on this weapon is that the air blast costs 150% more. In layman's terms, that's 50 ammo per air blast. Needless to say, this weapon isn't very friendly to people that aren't good at air blasting, but it's very friendly to people who forget that air blasts exist. Excuse me. You know, when I was talking about the Phlogistinator, I kind of blew off the air blast as a kind of useless thing, but the fact that this weapon costs 50 ammo for each air blast is almost worse than not having air blasts at all. If you accidentally air blast once or twice, that's already half of your 200 ammo gone. And the only upside is that it does critical hits from behind. That doesn't happen very often. And even though the stats I gave it here seem a bit nicer compared to other weapons, compared to the flamethrower, it's a lot less useful. As I said, there's not a lot of situations where you end up behind your enemy as a pyro. Not to mention your enemies are constantly going to be spy checking, especially enemy pyros, which is something that you should be doing, but instead you're pretending to be a spy and flanking the enemy. It's kind of fun to do that, but if you get found out, that's really annoying. So kind of putting that right in the middle. In terms of accessibility, it's just as easy to use as the flamethrower. I would have given it 5 out of 5 if it weren't for the higher air blast cost, because being able to get the jump on the enemy from behind gives you a huge advantage in a fight. Chances are, if you're going for a light class, they won't even notice before they're dead. So sure, why not? Go out there and use the back burner and burn her backs. I'm certainly not gonna stop you. This next weapon is probably one of the most fun weapons in the entire game, the thermal thruster. The thermal thruster is a unique weapon for the pyro that is a jetpack. The jetpack fires a little blast that launches the pyro in the direction that you're looking at. And as a little bonus, if you can aim well, it does triple the fall damage to anyone you land on, which is very similar to the man treads for the soldier. Not to mention, it's very handy for movement. It allows you to leap over obstacles and get to places way faster. In terms of utility, I only gave it a 3 out of 5. While technically it can do damage, you're not going to actually be doing damage with this weapon very often. Because of this, it has a bit less utility than any of Pyro's other damage-dealing secondaries, but it's also a very useful transportation tool. And in terms of accessibility, it's not hard to use at all. Its controls are extremely simple to grasp, and it's really easy to aim as well. And in terms of fun, I already said it is one of the most fun weapons to use. The weapon not only looks really cool, but it's a jetpack. What could possibly be more fun in this game? In conclusion, the thermal thruster is a very fun weapon. Would recommend. Moving on. Man, my back is itchy. Pyro, do you have a back scratcher? That's a rake, Pyro. That's not a back scratcher. Anyways, the quote-unquote back scratcher is a melee weapon for the pyro that does 25% more damage. You might think that that's really good, and yes, it is. But the downside is that you get 75% less health from healers. Not only when you're just holding it, but when you have it equipped. It's very vague when they say healers, but this includes all mediguns, dispensers, and payload carts. Now, this might seem bad, but 25% health from healers is still not bad. If the medic's using the quick fix instead of healing you 33 per second, it's still 8.4 per second. And with the quick fix's uber charge, it's 25 health per second. Now, this might still seem pretty bad, but luckily they compensate for this by making you get 50% more health from health packs when you have the weapon equipped. Now, this weapon is great when you don't have any medics on your team, but this doesn't happen very often, which is why I only gave it a 4 out of 5 in terms of utility. This weapon is very useful if you have quick access and knowledge of where all the health packs are on a given map, or if you have a quick fix medic on hand and you can stay alive about 4 times longer than you usually would. Not to mention that hefty 25% damage bonus on the melee weapon. But if we talk about accessibility, this is a very easy melee weapon to use. Considering the extra damage bonus, a base damage hit does 81 damage, and a critical does 244. That's enough damage to kill every single class in the game in one hit except for heavy. And the extra health that you get from packs makes it even more friendly for new players. And in terms of fun, it doesn't really care about fun, so I'll put it in the halfway spot with a 3 out of 5. The next loadout that I'm going to be reviewing is the Dragon Slayer set. This is a loadout that I came up with myself, and it consists of the Dragon's Fury, the Scorched Shot, and the Extinguisher, or the Postal Pummeler. Now, I don't actually have the Dragon's Fury, and, well, I've never used it before. So if any of you guys have, leave a comment down below rating the Dragon's Fury based off of its utility, accessibility, and how fun it is. With that weapon quickly out of the way, we're going to move on to the Scorched Shot. This weapon is basically a rocket launcher for the PYRO that sets people on fire. It is a flare gun. That means it shoots out a single projectile and it sets people on fire. But instead of doing critical hits to burning players like the flare gun does, the Scorched Shot only does mini crits. The Scorched Shot also does a lot of knockback, and it explodes when it hits the ground, which is different to all other flare guns, because usually the projectiles just fizzle out and die when they hit any surface. This means that when you hit one person, it will bounce off of them, hit the ground, and it can splash and hit multiple people. This makes it extremely effective for dealing with many people at once. Contrary to the flare gun or detonator, which can only hit one person at a time, this one can splash and hit multiple people at once, especially when they're clumped together. Not only that, but if you hit someone once and they get set on fire, the next shot will do more damage. And the afterburn that it flicks is very useful. The downsides are that it does 35% less damage, and it pushes you a bit less when you try to do a flare jump. And flare jumps are kind of underwhelming, to say the least. And with that said, let's see what score I gave it. Oh, wow. Jeez, another perfect weapon. That's 2 so far for the PYRO alone. Maybe the PYRO just has a lot of really good weapons. Anyways, let's go through why I chose each stat. For a 5 with the utility, as I already said, it's a flare gun, which is infinitely more useful to pyros than shotguns are. Not only that, but it explodes when it hits anything, including people, and since it bounces off of them and then explodes when it hits the ground, it can hit people up to 2 times. And that's right, I said people, because it can hit multiple people at once. That's really good, especially for like Payload or King of the Hill maps. When you've got all those people grouped up like that, it's not hard to hit your shots at all. Which is why I gave it a 5 out of 5 for accessibility too. It's not hard to hit people with this, and it does a ton of damage, which makes it really fun. It's a very fun weapon to use. With its really high fire rate, you can get a bunch of shots off, and just hearing those dings go off as you get that huge afterburn damage and those mini crits, it's all in all, a perfect weapon. So, what are you waiting for? Get out there and shoot your scorched shot and just decimate anyone, anywhere on the map with this insane weapon. And I'm pretty sure this weapon is the only reason that the Darwin's Danger Shield exists for the sniper. But we're not going to talk about that in this video. We'll save that for a later one. Up next is another great pyro weapon, the Axe Extinguisher / Postal Pummeler. Now, these two weapons are the exact same, except the Postal Pummeler looks like a mailbox. So, it's just a reskin. Anyways, as you might expect, the Axe Extinguisher is an extinguisher. It does a mini crit to burning targets and then extinguishes them. The damage that is dealt when you do extinguish them is based off of how much time of afterburn there is left. And when you kill someone with this weapon, you get a temporary speed boost. Sounds pretty great, huh? Well, the downsides are that it does 33% less damage, so if you're not hitting someone that's on fire, you're not really going to be getting a ton of damage. Luckily, since you're a pyro, there's not going to be a lot of situations where your enemies aren't on fire. Or, well, there shouldn't be. And no random crits. I mean, again, the mini crits that you're going to be getting from burning enemies are going to far outweigh the amount of random crits that you would ever be getting. And the weapon holsters 35% slower. I guess that's a use for the degreaser, but we're not talking with the degreaser, we're talking with the Axe Extinguisher. So, in terms of utility, I gave it a 4 out of 5. That is 2 times more than the score that I gave the stock axe for the pyro. This is because there are a lot more situations where you would want to go in for an attack with an axe when your enemy's already on fire. And at that point, why not use the Axe Extinguisher? But, of course, it's 1 point down from 5 because of the lack of random crits and the little bit less damage. It's just there are far more situations where this melee weapon would be useful compared to stock. And on the accessibility side of this 3-sided coin, I gave it a 3 out of 5 because, well, it's a melee weapon. I know I keep saying that, but it's hard to use because most people are using guns. You're literally bringing a knife to a gunfight. So you gotta be pretty dang good at knife fights. And if you can set people on fire and then chain the speed boosts, you can basically do the thing with the big earner that spies like to do and do chain stabs. See, another like you could build a spy kit based off of just pyro weapons at this point. And in terms of fun, you're going fast. As I already said, going faster than you should as any class in the game is fun. 4 to 5 because not only is it an effective melee weapon, it also makes you go fast. So all in all, not bad. Now, that's it for Pyro's primary weapons, but he still has a lot more secondary and melee weapons. So let's go over all of her other weapons in a quick little speed round. And we're going to be starting off with the detonator. Now, the detonator is another flare gun, which also does mini crits against burning players, so far it's on par with the scorched shot. But that's where the similarities end. It does 25% less damage, and it deals 50% more damage to yourself. But this weapon has the unique function where you can right-click at any time while the flare is in the air to detonate it. Now, if we take a look at the stats that I've provided here, compared to the scorched shot, it's way less useful. It's harder to use. For example, for accessibility, I give it really low. Unless you're detonating at the perfect time, it's really not going to do anything, which is why it's less useful and it's much harder to use. And for the melee weapon of this loadout, we've got the Home Wrecker. Dear God, this is an awful weapon. The stats go a little something like this. Double damage to buildings, and the damage can remove sappers, but it does 25% less damage to players. In numbers, that means it does 50 damage to players and 130 damage to buildings. Now, on paper, this might sound good, but in practice, well, the only buildings you're going to manage to get up close to as a pyro is either level 1 sentries, teleporters, or dispensers. And when have you ever gone up to a unattended dispenser and been like, in order to preserve my ammunition, I shall equip my melee and take a couple swings at it in order to dismantle it? Never, right? It's easier to just hold down M1, use your flamethrower for a couple seconds, and that little dispenser problem is gonna go away in a flash. So it's almost never useful. In terms of accessibility, it's a melee weapon, but you have to maneuver towards sentry nests, and it does less damage to players, so again, it's even more hard to use. I probably should have given it a 1. And in terms of fun, yeah, no, not good, bad weapon. Our next two weapons are the Panic Attack and the Hot Hand. The Panic Attack is a shotgun for the Pyro that shoots 50% more bullets per shot. It also deploys 50% faster, but this isn't really important. It fires in a wide fixed shot pattern of a 5x3 horizontal rectangle. Its downsides are that it does 20% less damage and successive shots become less accurate. This means for every shot that you fire in a row without stopping to reload, the rectangle is just going to get more and more spread out or larger. If we look at how useful the weapon is, because of the 50% more pellets and the 20% less damage, you're going to end up doing more damage than you would with a stock shotgun. And the fixed pattern almost guarantees that you're going to land a shot at longer range. Not to mention its namesake being the Panic Attack, allowing you to quickly pull out the weapon and frantically shoot it. And for accessibility, as I said, because of the fixed pattern and the fact that you can pull it out so fast, and the extra pellets make it much easier to hit your shots. This makes it very easy to use, but it's somewhat lacking in the amusement value, so to say. The Hot Hand is a slap weapon for the Pyro. Every time you hit someone, you gain a speed boost, but it does 20% less damage. This weapon has a similar function to the, fish? I forget what it's called. Holy mackerel, how can I forget? And the unarmed combat, that being every time you hit someone and kill someone, it goes directly into the kill feed for everyone to see. Because of the lower damage, it's less useful. In terms of accessibility, as I always say, it's a melee weapon. It's neither here nor there. But fun is where this weapon truly shines. Just walking up to your enemies and slapping them in the face, and then doing that multiple times, and it getting announced to everyone, and then when you finally kill them, that gets announced to everyone. Whew! Talk about a rush. I mean, I gotta hand it to them. I really love this weapon. Next up are the flare gun and the neon annihilator. The publicity blurb for the flare gun says, quote, "It allows the pyro to ignite an enemy at long range, but does require careful aim on their part. It's particularly useful for causing havoc on snipers and engineers who want to keep their distance." The weapon not only sets people on fire, but it also does critical damage to people that are on fire. The base damage is 30, but on a critical it does 90 damage, not to mention the afterburn. This means with a 1-2 combo with the flare gun, you're gonna have no problem taking out any light class really. Now, when I rated it, I gave it a 4 out of 5 for utility. The Pyro doesn't have a lot of options when it comes to long range, so the flare gun is their best option. Despite the fact that it's hard to aim, it's not that hard to use really. The high damage potential with the critical hits makes this very useful and pretty dang easy to get kills with. Moving on to the Pyro Shark's weapon, the Neon Annihilator. Like the Homewrecker, the Neon Annihilator does have the ability to remove sappers. It also has the upside of doing critical damage to wet players. This includes water, Girardi, Mad Milk, and the Gas Passer's Gas Cloud. But the downsides are pretty devastating because it has no random crits and it does 20% less damage. This means the weapon is very useful only in pretty specific scenarios. Not to mention, most maps don't even have water on them, but it's really fun. You can just instantly kill anyone that happens to mindlessly go for a little dip in the pool, you know? I don't have to explain myself with these stats. I mean, if you really want to call any of these stats into question, just leave a comment. Like, this is just my opinion, but I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. And finally, now for the last two weapons, We definitely haven't saved the best for the last though, because the first weapon that we have is the reserve shooter. Now, I would just like to make something very clear. When I am referring to a multi-class weapon, such as the reserve shooter, I am only referring to the reserve shooter in the hands of the pyro. This weapon can also be used by the soldier, but the soldier actually gets use out of the weapon. To explain that, let's take a look at the stats, shall we? The reserve shooter. Mini crits targets launched airborne by explosions, grapple hooks, rocket packs, or air blast. Sounds pretty great, huh? Well, I lied. If you look at the stats on the little card that I have on the left of the screen, it doesn't say air blast for some reason. In 2017, in the Jungle Inferno update, they removed that function. They basically made the weapon useless for pyros. But the pyro can still use this weapon. The chances that someone's going to rocket jump in your general direction, we'll just cancel out grapple hooks and the thermal thruster, because the chances that anyone's using those weapons, sticky jumpers and rocket jumpers. How often do you fight someone that's doing that? Like mid-air rocket jump, you pull out your reserve shooter and deal mini crits? The point of the weapon is that you knock someone up into the air and then shoot them. The soldier can easily do this. The pyro can also do this with an air blast, even though it pushes someone backwards more than upwards, but it doesn't do mini crits. So the only upside is that it deploys faster. What? And it has 2 less shots in its clip, down from 6 to 4. Need I say more? And now for the last weapon. We are finally here, ladies and gentlemen. The sharpened volcano fragment. The sharpened volcano fragment is basically the opposite of the extinguisher. Instead of extinguishing people on fire, it takes people that aren't on fire and sets them on fire. And it has the downside of 20% less damage. This means it does 52 damage per hit, but then it does 60 total damage in afterburn. That's, well, 112 damage total. But chances are they aren't really going to be affected entirely by that afterburn. There are many ways to resist it. And as I said, if you're a pyro and you have enemies that aren't set on fire already, you're doing something wrong. Having a melee weapon that just sets people on fire is a lot less useful compared to the extinguisher, because you should already be setting people on fire. The only way that this weapon really shines, in my opinion, is probably just in medieval mode, where pyro is restricted to just using their melee. But the fact that this weapon is only useful when you don't have the flamethrower, that really says something. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Happy holidays and happy new year. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. My name is Voxel Obsession, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.